Is the United States spying over Nigeria? According to a new report by Reuters, the United States has been conducting intelligence-gathering flights over large parts of Nigeria since late November. And the report cites flight tracking data as well as current and former U.S. officials.
Nothing exploded. No troops landed. No warnings were issued. Yet something changed in Nigeria in late November. High above the noise of daily life, above markets, highways, schools, and villages, an invisible presence began to pass again and again through the sky. Most people never noticed, but in the world of power and geopolitics, silence like that is never empty. Because when great powers start moving quietly, it usually means decisions are being made before anyone is told. At the same time, thousands of miles away in Washington, Donald Trump issued a blunt warning about Nigeria, accusing its government of failing to stop violence and hinting at possible intervention. Days later, the skies over Africa's largest nation were no longer just Nigerian skies. Coincidence? Or the opening move of a much bigger game? Let's find out. At first, nothing looked different. The skies over Nigeria were still blue. Planes still passed now and then, just like any other day. People still rushed through traffic in Lagos. Farmers still walked their fields in the north, and families still locked their doors a little tighter at night. Yet beneath that normality, something had shifted. Since late November, something unfamiliar had begun to trace long, quiet paths across Nigeria's airspace. Not once, not twice, but almost every day. No announcements were made, no flags were raised. But in geopolitics, the most important moves rarely come with noise. On the ground, Nigeria was already under strain. Armed groups were expanding their reach. Kidnappings had become routine. Entire highways were feared after sunset. In northern states, more than 300 school children had been abducted, shaking the country and reminding everyone how fragile security had become. President Bola Tinubu responded by declaring a security emergency, ordering mass recruitment into the army and police, and promising tougher action. It was an admission that the crisis was no longer isolated. It was national. And yet, while Nigerians focused on what they could see, attacks, fear, and political speeches, something else was unfolding above them, unseen. Quiet routes across the sky, looping patterns, long arcs that didn't fit the rhythm of commercial flights. To most eyes, it meant nothing. But to those who read power, it meant everything. Because the sky is not just space, they are territory. And when someone else starts moving through your territory without making a show of it, it signals that your problems are no longer just yours. What made this moment even heavier was what had just happened in Washington. In November, Donald Trump publicly accused Nigeria's government of failing to stop violence against Christian communities and warned that the United States might intervene if the situation did not improve. The words were sharp, direct, the kind of words that stick. Nigeria pushed back, saying the violence was complex, affecting both Muslims and Christians, driven by criminal and militant groups rather than a religious war. But once such a narrative is released by a U.S. president, it does not simply fade. It becomes a lens through which everything else is judged. And then, almost immediately after those words, the quiet movements in the sky began. No one in Nigeria heard a speech announcing cooperation. No press conference spoke of joint missions. No headlines were saying foreign aircraft would now patrol Nigerian airspace. Just silence and patterns only visible on flight tracking screens thousands of miles away. That silence itself became the message. Because when powerful countries want to help, they usually say so. When they want to prepare, they usually don't. For ordinary Nigerians, life continued as usual. But for anyone watching carefully, the timing was too precise to ignore. Threats from Washington on one side, unexplained activity in the skies on the other hand. Two pieces of a puzzle that seemed to be sliding together. So the question at the heart of this story is simple and unsettling. What exactly started flying over Nigeria after Trump's warning? And who was really behind it? What started flying over Nigeria was not a Nigerian aircraft at all. It was American. Flight tracking data later revealed that a jet linked to the United States had begun sweeping across Nigerian airspace almost every day since late November. It did not take off from Abuja or Lagos. It rose from Accra, Ghana, crossed deep into Nigeria, traced long, looping paths over multiple regions, and then quietly returned to base. Over and over again, like a patrol that did not want to be noticed. The aircraft was identified as a Gulfstream Vi, a long-range business jet, but one commonly modified for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance missions. In military form, it becomes a flying command post, packed with equipment to intercept communications, monitor electronic signals, track movements on the ground, and map activity across vast areas. This is not a plane you use to look out of the window. It is a plane you use to listen. And it was being operated by Tenax Aerospace, a Mississippi-based company known for providing special mission aircraft and working closely with the U.S. military. Not an airline, not a humanitarian group. A contractor whose business is flying when governments want eyes in the sky without putting official military markings on the tail. That detail matters. Because when surveillance is outsourced like this, it gives governments room to act without formally announcing anything. It creates distance, plausible deniability. But the mission remains the same: collect intelligence. Even more telling was where the jet came from before it reached Ghana. Flight data showed it had been at MacDill Air Force Base in Florida earlier in November, the headquarters of U.S. Special Operations Command. From there, it flew to Accra on November 24th. Days later, the Nigerian overflights began. That is not how random travel looks. That is how assets are repositioned. Accra itself is not just a friendly capital. Analysts describe it as a known hub for U.S. military logistics in West Africa. Quiet, stable, cooperative. A place where aircraft can operate without drawing attention, while still reaching deep into the region. From Ghana, Nigeria's vast airspace becomes easily accessible. Yet despite all this, there was no official announcement from Washington. No statement from Abuja welcoming cooperation. No public explanation of why a US-linked surveillance aircraft was now flying regular routes over Africa's largest country. When asked, U.S. officials acknowledged the flights but refused to give details, citing diplomatic sensitivity. Tenax Aerospace did not respond to requests for comment. Nigerian military spokespeople stayed silent. That silence was almost louder than any statement could have been. Because if this were routine counterinsurgency support, it would normally be showcased as a partnership. If it were training, it would be public. If it were humanitarian, it would be advertised. But this was none of those. This was quiet, technical, and deliberately low profile. And that raises the obvious question. If the U.S. suddenly moved a surveillance jet from its special operations base to Ghana and began near-daily intelligence flights over Nigeria, what exactly changed in the region that made rebuilding these eyes in the sky so urgent? What changed was that the United States lost its main window into West Africa. Last year, Niger ordered American troops to leave a major desert air base that had served as a cornerstone of U.S. surveillance across the Sahel. From that base, Washington had been watching militant movements, tracking smuggling routes, and monitoring vast stretches of territory from Libya down toward Nigeria. When Niger shut that door and instead turned to Russia for security support, it didn't just change one partnership. It shattered a whole intelligence network that the U.S. had built over the years. Suddenly, Washington was blind in a region that matters deeply to its counterinsurgency strategy. And when great powers lose visibility, they don't accept it. They rebuild. That is why Ghana became critical. And that is why Nigeria moved into focus. Africa's most populous country sits right at the center of West Africa, bordering unstable regions, facing active insurgencies, and connecting the Sahel to the Gulf of Guinea. If you want to regain eyes over this part of the continent, Nigeria's skies are the perfect place to start. U.S. officials, speaking to Reuters, gave their official explanation. The flights, they said, were meant to track Boko Haram and its splinter group, Islamic State West Africa Province. They were also tied to efforts to locate a U.S. pilot kidnapped in neighboring Niger while working for a missionary agency. On paper, that sounds reasonable. Counterinsurgency, hostage tracking, regional stability. But here's the deeper truth. Even if all of that is partly real, it does not explain the scale, frequency, and timing of these missions. Near-daily flights are not just about one kidnapping. They are about building a full picture, mapping patterns, reconstructing an intelligence web that was torn apart when Niger shut the door. And then there is the political trigger that gave urgency to it all. In November, Donald Trump publicly warned Nigeria, accusing its government of failing to stop violence against Christian communities and hinting at possible intervention. Those words were not spoken in a vacuum. Once a U.S. president frames a country's internal crisis in moral terms, it creates space for action. Surveillance becomes easier to justify. Pressure becomes easier to apply. From that moment, Washington needed its own data. Not just reports from Abuja, not just briefings from allies. It needed independent eyes in the sky to judge the situation for itself, to see where militants operate, to assess whether Nigeria is doing enough, to decide what comes next. Nigeria, for its part, rejected the idea that the violence is a simple religious conflict. Abuja has consistently said that both Muslims and Christians are targeted by armed groups, and that the crisis is driven by criminal gangs, insurgents, and local conflicts, not a war on one faith. But once a powerful country locks onto a narrative, facts alone rarely loosen its grip. So the flights serve two purposes at once. Militarily, they rebuild the U.S. intelligence reach after the loss of Niger. Politically, they give Washington leverage, its own version of reality over Nigeria's security situation, which leads to the most sensitive part of this story. Because for flights like these to happen so frequently over Nigeria, one question cannot be avoided. Did Nigeria agree to let them happen? Let's pause for a second to say big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. Yes, Nigeria did agree, but quietly, and at a moment of deep vulnerability. According to a Nigerian security source cited by Reuters, on November 20th, Nigeria's National Security Advisor, Nuhu Ribadu, met with U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. In that meeting, the United States agreed to deploy air assets for intelligence gathering. In plain terms, that means these surveillance flights over Nigeria are not happening in secret defiance of Abuja. They are happening with their consent. But consent in geopolitics is never just a signature. It depends on who is asking and how desperate the other side is. At the time of that meeting, Nigeria was under intense pressure. Armed attacks were escalating. Kidnappings had reached shocking levels. School children were being taken in mass abductions that horrified the country. Highways were no longer safe. Communities were begging for protection. President Bola Tinubu had just declared a security emergency, ordering mass recruitment into the army and police. It was a public admission that the state was struggling to contain the crisis. In moments like this, governments look for help wherever they can find it. And when a superpower offers intelligence, technology, and surveillance, it is hard to refuse, especially when that same superpower has just issued public warnings about possible intervention. So yes, Nigeria may have opened its skies, but it did so from a position of weakness, not strength. U.S. officials later confirmed the aircraft had been flying over Nigeria, but refused to give details, citing diplomatic sensitivity. The Pentagon said it had held productive meetings with Nigeria after Trump's comments, but declined to discuss intelligence activities. Nigerian military spokespeople did not respond to requests for comment. Ghana's defense officials also stayed silent. Everyone involved chose their words carefully, or chose not to speak at all. And that silence tells you something important. Because when cooperation is truly equal, it is often celebrated. Joint statements are issued, press conferences are held, partnerships are highlighted. But when cooperation shifts power in uncomfortable ways, it tends to be wrapped in quiet language and anonymity. For Nigeria, allowing foreign surveillance in its skies carries real risks. Once another country starts collecting its own intelligence inside your borders, it no longer depends on your reports. It can judge your performance. It can identify your weaknesses. It can decide where you are failing, and then use that assessment to justify pressure, conditions, or deeper involvement. And this is happening at a time when Nigeria's crisis is already being framed from abroad in moral terms. Trump's narrative of religious violence gives Washington a reason to say, "We are watching because we must, because someone has to." That is how leverage is built, not through one big dramatic move, but through a series of quiet permissions that slowly change who holds the upper hand. Which brings us to the larger picture. Because this is not just about helping Nigeria fight militants, it is also about what the United States lost in the region and what it is now trying to rebuild. So the real question is, beyond Nigeria's crisis, What bigger strategic game are these flights part of? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video, and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. They are part of Washington's attempt to rebuild power in a region it is quietly losing. When Niger forced U.S. troops out and turned to Russia, it sent a shock through American strategy in West Africa. For years, the U.S. had relied on bases in the Sahel to monitor militant groups, protect its interests, and shape security outcomes across the region. Losing Niger didn't just mean losing a runway. It meant losing influence, losing access, losing the ability to see and respond first. At the same time, countries like Mali and Burkina Faso were also moving away from Western security partnerships, choosing new paths and new allies. Slowly, the map of West Africa was changing, and for Washington, Nigeria became the last major pillar it could not afford to lose. Nigeria is not just another state. It is Africa's most populous nation, its largest economy, and the anchor of West Africa. If the U.S. maintains deep security influence in Nigeria, it still has a foothold in the region. If it loses Nigeria too, its entire position in West Africa weakens. That is why these flights matter beyond counterinsurgency. Surveillance over Nigeria allows Washington to rebuild an intelligence network that stretches back into the Sahel. From Nigerian skies, the U.S. can once again monitor militant movements, cross-border flows, and regional dynamics. In strategic terms, Nigeria becomes the new platform to replace what was lost in Niger, and Trump's threats fit neatly into this picture. By framing Nigeria's crisis as a moral failure, Washington creates political space for deeper involvement. Surveillance is no longer just about information. It becomes about judgment, about deciding whether Nigeria is doing enough, about preparing options if Washington concludes that it is not. This is how influence tightens, not with tanks, but with data, not with bases, but with access. For Nigeria, this creates a dangerous imbalance. On paper, it is cooperation. In reality, one side now controls the tools that define reality itself. Whoever owns the intelligence owns the narrative, and whoever owns the narrative shapes the next steps. Today, U.S. officials say the flights are about Boko Haram, Islamic State West Africa province, and a kidnapped pilot. Tomorrow, the same intelligence could be used to argue that Nigeria is failing. It needs more help, that stronger measures are required, that advisors must be sent. Those operations must expand. This is not speculation. It is how security partnerships have evolved in many countries before. And all of this is happening quietly, while Nigerians deal with fear, loss, and uncertainty on the ground. The sky becomes a space where decisions about Nigeria's future are being prepared without public debate, without parliamentary approval, without citizens even knowing it is happening. Which brings us to the moment of truth. Because once foreign surveillance becomes normal, it rarely stays limited to just watching. So the final question is this: if American eyes now control the picture from above Nigeria, what does that mean for who will control what happens below? It means the balance of control is already shifting. When American eyes dominate the picture from above Nigeria, they don't just observe, they define. They decide what counts as a threat, where failure lies, and what response seems necessary. Intelligence is not neutral, it shapes choices. And once a foreign power holds the clearest view of your security reality, it gains quiet power over your future. Today, it is surveillance flights. That sounds technical, almost harmless. But in modern conflicts, surveillance is the first layer of involvement. It comes before advisors, before training missions, before special forces, before permanent facilities. Each step is justified by the data collected in the step before it. This is how presence grows without ever needing a dramatic announcement. For Nigeria, the risk is not just that foreign aircraft are in its skies. The risk is that its crisis is being interpreted through a lens built in Washington. Trump's framing of Nigeria as failing to protect Christians gives the U.S. a moral storyline. The intelligence flights give it the evidence it needs to argue its case. Together, they create pressure, subtle but powerful. And once that pressure exists, choice is narrow. If Nigeria resists deeper involvement later, it can be accused of hiding something. If it accepts more help, it moves further into dependence. Either way, control slowly slips. This is happening at a moment when Nigeria is vulnerable. Its security forces are stretched, its people are exhausted, its leadership is under pressure to show results. In such moments, short-term relief can look more important than long-term independence. But history is full of examples where countries traded sovereignty for security, only to find they lost both. What makes this moment especially sensitive is the regional context. West Africa is in flux. Old alliances are breaking, new ones are forming. Niger's pivot to Russia showed that African states can choose different paths. But it also showed that when they do, great powers don't retreat, they reposition. Nigeria now appears to be where Washington is repositioning. And once Nigeria becomes the new anchor for US intelligence in the region, it is no longer just dealing with its own problems. It becomes part of a wider strategic contest between global powers. Its internal crisis becomes a stage on which others pursue their interests. The planes will keep flying because they serve too many purposes to stop. They rebuild the US reach, they collect leverage, they prepare options, and all of it happens far above public view, while ordinary Nigerians struggle with fear on the ground. This does not mean intervention is inevitable, but it does mean the conditions for pressure are being quietly assembled. So Nigeria stands at a silent crossroads. It can treat these flights as temporary help, or it can recognize them as the opening move of a deeper involvement that will be harder to reverse the longer it continues. Because once foreign powers grow comfortable in your skies, they rarely stay satisfied with just watching. So the final question Nigeria must confront is this: will these eyes in the sky fade away once security improves, or are they the first sign that Nigeria's future is about to be shaped by someone else? Let us know in the comment section, what do you think about this? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.